I'm Keith Williamson in Darlington County. This is family land. It's been in the family several generations, and it's been managed for wildlife for many years, but more the last 10 or so years has been much more intensively. We are using control fire, we're using longleaf plantings, and we're using supplemental feeding to really boost our quail population. All wild birds. It's about 1,000 acres contiguous. Probably 600 to 800 of it is under good management, and we're seeing a real good response on quail populations.
Hi, I'm Andy Krieg, farm bill quail biologist with South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and I'm going to go over with you today some of the habitat requirements of bobwhite quail and other native grassland and shrubland dependent species. There are three main components, and they all are dependent on a lower basal area to show up on the landscape. The first component is a shrub component, native shrubs. This can take the form of wax myrtles, chickasaw plums, other species. Also a grass component. This is native bunch grasses, little blue stem, Indian grass, other native species, and there's also the forb component. Forbs attract insects and produce seed to feed these birds. We'll be going over a little bit more in a little bit more detail each component. Here we have a blackberry thicket. As you can see, a quail can easily get into this and hide from a hawk. And throughout this stand, there's several other blackberry thickets throughout here. The thing is, if this gets too big, the hawk can get into it also. The way we control the height of these blackberry thickets is through fire. We like to stay on a 1 to 2 year burn rotation, where we keep one area unburned and keep the other area of the property burned. That provides some cover still after a spring growing season burn. But it also, like I said, keeps the thicket in a usable form for quail. These will regenerate. This was burned this year. This blackberry will regenerate, and you can see it's already 3 feet high. So that just provides some cover for quail.
Hello, I'm TJ Savereno. I'm a forestry and wildlife agent with Clemson University Cooperative Extension, and I'm here with Andy and Parker and Mr. Williamson on Keith Williamson's property. And I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the components that Andy's already mentioned are the forbs. The rule of the thirds is a third grasses or nesting habitat, a third forbs or brood rearing habitat, and a third shrubs, that heavy cover that quail need. And one reason that I like this spot right here is I can point out a lot of different things, and that's what you see in well-maintained habitat that's burned frequently, is a diversity of species. Forbs are important during the brood rearing season because they attract a lot of insects, and those little quail, when they hatch out, they're not very big, and they're following their mama around, and they need a high protein source in those early months to grow as much as they do. And so the insects are very important. And these flowering plants, the forbs, are important to attract those insects. The legumes make up, or the plants in the pea family, the legumes, are important for a number of reasons, but one of them is that right now they are flowering, so they attract insects, but they also set seed, which this plant is starting to now, these little triangular segmented seed pods. And these seeds contain a high amount of protein because legumes are nitrogen fixers, and they have a lot of protein in the foliage, they have a lot of protein in the seeds, and the seeds are very hard and persistent. So this plant that I'm holding right here is one of the desmodiums, or the beggar lice, but there are other legumes that you see around here as well. Some of the things that might not show up well in this shot, but things like tephrosia. This is not goat's rue, but this is tephrosia, which is another one of the legumes. And then in addition to the legumes, the other forbs that are important are some of the asters. The asters are the second group that are really important to quail. And these are the flowering species like Pityopsis, but things in the composite family or the sunflower family are really important. They're very attractive to pollinators and bring them in. And then of course you see the bunch grasses that Andy already mentioned. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about them a little bit later on. So here we have one of the eupatoriums, which are in the composite family. The eupatoriums are commonly known as thoroughworts, and they are a very large group, a lot of species within the genus, but they are important like the other asters because they attract insects. Some of the seeds of composites, depending on the species, are important as quail food later on in the year as well. Right here beside me is one of the legumes. This is spurred butterfly pea, which is a vine. There's a lot of it scattered around here. Again, this produces a hard-coated seed that is important for quail, and it also attracts pollinators. This plant here to my left, you can see some of the blooms on it here, these small yellow flowers. This is Pityopsis graminifolia, or silk-leaved aster. It's another one of the composites that are important because they attract a lot of insects, and so those young quail can get the insects that they need, that protein source. It also produces seeds. Now, this is one species that will proliferate very well in a stand that is regularly burned, and it also persists for a long time in remnant longleaf stands after burning and management has stopped because it's a very hardy species. Sometimes you'll see this in people's yards when there's no longleaf around and there's been no management there, but it'll persist for a long time. This is one of the Lespedizas. Lespediza is one of the genera that are in the legume family. You can see this is one of the native shrub Lespedizas, and it's going to produce a lot of seed, a lot of that hard, persistent seed high in protein that are important for quail later on in the year. As you might have noticed, there's a little dusky-winged butterfly that is flying around, so testifying to the fact that it is a good pollinator species as well. This is one of the mint species. This is Monarda punctata, or spotted horse mint, one of the common names. And the mints are also pretty important in terms of pollinator species. A lot of bumblebees will visit mints and a lot of other small pollinators that can end up as food sources for young quail. This plant is large flowered partridge pea, Chamaecrista fasciculata, and again another legume. And this will produce seed pods, which you may not be able to make out, but here's one right here by my thumb, hasn't filled out yet. But again, important quail food. It's the hard, persistent, high protein seed that's important for quail.
I want to talk to you about the last component, the grass component of a grassland quail habitat. Right here we have broom straw blue stem. The main use for grass is nesting for quail and other ground nesting birds. In the spring and throughout the summer of the year, they will get in here and build a nest out of the prior year's growth. This is very critical. As you can see, it's pretty easy to hide a nest in this clump. The other main key use of grasses for quail is to carry a fire. Grasses are key in getting a fire, and especially the 2-year rotation we're looking for in this situation. The main fuel for that fire is blue stem, either little blue stem or broom straw blue stem. Some other key grasses that provide nesting habitat and fuel are Indian grass, big blue stem. What we have here is split-beard blue stem. It's another key grass component for quail. As you can see, it's just got a little bit different seed head than the broom straw blue stem. and but it still fulfills the same things. The quail can nest in the base of these bunch grasses. Something I also wanted to talk to you about is movement. These grasses can get so thick that quail cannot travel through them easily, especially when you think about quail, when they hatch out, they're the size of your thumb. They got to be able to navigate these grasses, and that's part of the reason why we burn on that 2-year rotation also, is to lighten the load of these grasses, make it a little bit easier for quail to move through there, but also to still have this overhead protection of the grasses and forbs and shrubs throughout the landscape. In South Carolina, forest management is quail management. Most quail management is done on forest lands. And to get quail habitat, they need a few things. Number one, the basal area. How many trees are on the landscape? We measure that either with a prism or an angle gauge. I just took a measurement on this land, and this land measurement was between 70 and 80 basal area. Property we saw previously today, it was probably 20 to 30 basal area. The ground story was much more developed there. This one, this stand right here behind me, was just recently reclaimed this year with growing season fire. As you can see, there's a lot of sweet gum regeneration. But we will show you another stand a little bit later where no growing season fire has been used in several years, and mid-story is developed. Quail are a fire-dependent species, and without fire, sweet gum and other hardwood trees tend to take over a pine stand. Most important things for quail are thinning to a basal area, ideally less than this, between 30 and 50 basal area, and also growing season fire, preferably on a 2-year rotation. We do a lot of research trying to see what better suits quail and a variety of other wildlife on some of these forested stands. Behind me today is a stand that hasn't been burned in several years. It was thinned at some point, and native plants were allowed to regenerate in it. As you can see, a mid-story has developed. Most of the trees within that mid-story are sweet gum, water oak, a variety of fire-intolerant species. These species wouldn't be there if growing season fire was used on a somewhat regular basis. The problem with having a mid-story like this is it blocks the sunlight from reaching the ground. There is very little understory. If we walked in there, there's pretty much pine needles, leaves, not much else on the ground. We're standing in an example of bad quail habitat. It's hard for a quail to make a living in the stand. This is a 12 to 15-year-old regeneration site, and you will see mostly sweet gum, maybe water oak and hickory also present in the stand. These are all species that are not fire tolerant. If a growing season fire was in these areas, there would be a lot less overstory and a lot more understory. But as you can see behind me, there is not much for a quail to live on or hide in. You can see my feet quite easily. It's all because there's no light on the floor, and there's no seed-producing, insect-attracting plants in this area. Now this could be remedied through use of fire and thinning, but as we speak, this is a major predator-attracting area. If a quail comes through these areas, he's likely to be eaten by a Cooper's hawk or another raptor. All right, we're at the PD Rec, and we're looking at some of the field borders that surround some of their ag fields. These borders represent a part of farming that was lost with the modern agriculture. Modern agriculture, the equipment is able to farm all the way up to the tree line. As you can see, this little border here is only probably like 10 yards, 15 yards wide, but it's really has everything that quail need, all the components within this border. It's got the grass component, as you can see in front of us. It's got some blackberries over here providing cover. There's a lot more cover behind us in the young longleaf stand, and most importantly, there's a forb component. In this area we're looking at, there's a very strong partridge pea ragweed component, and none of this was planted. This is all volunteer. It came most recently it was winter disc, and that probably is what stimulated this growth here. Forbs are here, especially partridge pea and ragweed, are here to attract insects. They do provide a high quality food source in the fall, but their number one goal in quail management is to attract insects. If we go out inside in this stand here is almost a pure monoculture of partridge pea. If we go down there and we look underneath it, there's plenty of room for travel for young chicks, and when quail are born until they reach adult size, they are very dependent on insects to get the protein requirement that they need. And these areas that we call brood fields on quail plantations are very beneficial, and they provide a lot of insects, and the type of insects that the quail need. Like I said, this is a lot of quail producing power in a very small strip and at very low cost. This is common ragweed. It's one of the plants that we plant for quail, but this is volunteer. As you can see by the structure of the leaves, it has a lot of surface area. This plant is very drought resistant. It will still produce a lot of insects even in the drought. You can see some of the seeds produced. Yes, this is what people are allergic to, but it also produces high quality seed both for quail and for doves, and a variety of non-game species. This is a large flowered partridge pea. Once again, it's one of the plants that we plant for brood fields. As you can see, it has these big, large peas with several seeds that in a few months will fall to the ground. Yellow flower here, but main reason we're planting this again is to attract insects for quail. This is small flowered partridge pea, also a very good insect attractor, has smaller yellow flowers on it. The peas are about half the size of the large flowered partridge pea, but once again it's a great insect producer, and it's stimulated by growing season fire and winter disking. One thing we want to talk about that restricts quail movement and leads to the decline of quail is introduced non-native grasses. In the coastal plain, the worst ones are Bermuda grass and Bahia grass. These grasses restrict movement, and if you're a quail the size of my thumb, it is very hard to make it through a stand of Bermuda grass. And if anywhere that pretty much grows cattle and in the coastal plain, their number one forage is Bermuda grass. Now up in the Piedmont area, fescue is a lot more prevalent, and there's a lot more cattle there.
This is one of the pollinator habitat strips that were planted here at Clemson's PD Research and Education Center, also known as the PD Rec. And included in this mix that we received from a seed company is little bluestem. And this is one of the important native warm season grasses for quail and a number of other wildlife species. It is a bunch grass. It grows from a narrow clump at the bottom and spreads out at the top, which, as we have discussed, gives that freedom of movement down at the ground and yet some overhead cover. Yet another of the native warm season grasses are in the genus Sorghastrum. and there's several of those. This one is Sorghastrum nutans, which is yellow Indian grass, also our state grass of South Carolina. But like the others, it is a bunch grass and provides a lot of benefits for wildlife. This longleaf stand behind me was planted here at the PD Rec back in 2009, and it was planted in old field habitat, which had been growing soybeans the previous season. But the field had been in agricultural rotation for probably 100 years or more. But we planted this field in 2009, as I said, and it was burned pretty regularly until about 2016. We missed a few years, but we got a burn back in here this year in March, on March 2nd. You can see that we lost some trees. It got a little hot at this end, but for wildlife purposes, those openings create a little bit different habitat, let a little more sunlight get in there, and you get some different species. Longleaf pine and bobwhite quail work well together, and that's because longleaf pine is a pretty fire-tolerant species. In fact, it's a fire-dependent species for its continuation. These seedlings don't tolerate much competition from other vegetation, so being able to burn it on a regular basis, on annual or biannual or even a 3-year rotation, depending on what type of habitat, keeps those competing species under control. And once these trees get this size, they're pretty close to fire-proof. They're not, though. They're fire-resistant. But they do allow you to go in, and even when they're dropping seeds and regenerating, the seedlings are fairly tolerant as well to fire. So you get that next generation of longleaf pine coming in even while you're burning. This legume, which has come up in the old field habitat that was planted in pine, is Lespedeza, another one of the Lespedezas. This one is Lespedeza hirta, or hairy Lespedeza. The hairiness on the leaves gives them a little bit of a silver color to it, but you can see the flower heads forming on these. They're prolific seed producers, another good species for attracting insects for young quail, but also in producing those hard, persistent seeds. Yet another legume in the old field pine habitat is this Desmodium, another one of the beggar lice. This is Desmodium strictum, and you can see it sprawling all over the place here. I should emphasize that all these plants that you see in here, all these native species, have come in on their own over time. Prior to 2009, when this was planted, this had been an agricultural field with a lot of herbicides applied to it, and it had been farmed for so long that there was very little left in the seed bank. But gradually, here 11 years later, these native species are making inroads into this area. One of the volunteer species in here too is a pretty common plant on the landscape in the southeast, and that's Diodia, also called Virginia buttonweed. But it produces a seed that is preferred by quail. They will eat a lot of this plant. And another plant that also produces seed that's used by quail is croton, which we see right here.
Behind me is a PD Rec pollinator beneficial insect area, field border area. These areas are maintained through use of growing season fire and also winter disking. Winter disking is disking anytime that the leaves have fallen off the trees, primarily between November and February. Disking during this time promotes beneficial plants such as ragweed, partridge pea, and other food-producing, insect-attracting plants. If you disc outside of that season, disking the warmer seasons, you mainly get field weeds that are, dog fennel, sickle pod, coffee weed, things that are not beneficial for quail and most people want to discourage. Another thing I wanted to mention is mowing. A lot of people love to mow their land. If we could just minimize mowing, especially during nesting season, but you know, the least amount of mowing we can get away with, the better. There are some spots, especially in these pollinator areas, where we use mowing. If there's a large presence of dog fennel, we like to high mow, but try not to cut any plants that we're looking to grow for quail.
This longleaf stand was planted also in 2009, the same time as the old field habitat, but this was a site that had been cut over. It had a history of longleaf pine on this site and had never been in cultivation as far as I know. So there was much less soil disturbance, use of herbicides over time. Up until 1996, it had a canopy of mature longleaf pine in here. But after it was cut, it was allowed to just come back on its own. It wasn't replanted. There was no management being done. And we came in and did herbicide treatment and planted in 2009 and have been managing it with fire. Again, like the other site, we did no planting here in terms of native plant species, but you can see how much diversity there is in this stand in terms of the asters, some of these white eupatoriums, the yellow goldenrods, the various lespedezas, blackberry patches developing. And so it just is an example of if a site hasn't had that agricultural disturbance for a long period of time, it stays viable. Those seeds stay viable in the soil seed bank for a long time. One of the lespedezas that we don't want to see anymore, although it was promoted at one time, is Sericea lespedeza, this plant here in my right hand. It's an Asian introduced species. It was introduced as a forage for cattle. It was also introduced because of its ability to take hold quickly and to hold hillsides and road embankments in place. It was also promoted as a quail food, but like a lot of other Asian and other introduced species, it has a tendency to displace some of our native plants. But it has a lot of similarity to this native lespedeza that you have beside me, and you might mistake the two if you don't look closely. This is slender lespedeza, Lespedeza virginica, and it is a native species, a good prolific seed producer for quail and songbirds and other species. But it's just a tale of two lespedezas here, one that we don't want and one that we do.
It is critical to have evenly spaced shrub component. As you look through this landscape behind me, there's a shrub. This isn't actually a shrub, but this is a regenerating tree that is acting as a shrub, where a quail can get in and attack from an avian predator. Avian predators are the highest mortality of adult quail. Is seen through avian predators. They need to have evenly spaced cover throughout the landscape so they can go underneath into this cover to get away from a Cooper's hawk or another avian predator. Hawk migrate through this area twice a year. They migrate down to Florida in the months of October, November, December, and then they migrate back through in February. And if we eliminate this type of cover by doing dormant season fires or mowing areas during the winter, we take away a lot of the plants that could be providing refuge for quail.